Hey, everybody, and welcome back. Hopefully, you had a great Thanksgiving. For those of you that celebrated Thanksgiving, I hope you had a good time with your family and your friends. For those of you who did not, I hope you had a nice, long, restful break on the extended weekend. Sorry I missed you in class, but just because we missed class doesn't mean we have to miss the information we would have covered. So I'm recording this PowerPoint for you so you can get caught up on the information we would have shared in class, some of the concepts, how they're applied, and so forth. Don't forget to read DC Connect in your chapter to make sure you capture everything that needs to be done. For this week, we will actually talk about the key principles and practices for effective employee health and safety programs, which includes responsibilities, which includes awareness, which includes how to protect yourself in the workplace. So with no further ado, let's dig in. All right, so we're going to start this week with a question. That question simply is, how many workplace deaths occur in Canada each year? Press pause now, think about it, and come up with a number in your head. Once you have that number established, please press play. Welcome back. I'm not sure really where your mind was at, but I'm going to go through a little bit of statistical analysis here. Back in 2010, believe it or not, 1 in every 68 workers could expect to be injured each year. And in 2012, there were 977 workplace deaths. That averages about 4 Canadian workers every working day. Things got a little bit better by 2015, and we were down to 852 deaths. But as a result of this, the need for accident awareness, for accident prevention, and whatnot grew because there's over 1 million work-related injuries every year. In fact, in 2013, there were 241,000 plus injuries serious enough to cause workers to miss at least one day of work. That had a roughly $11 million price tag to payouts to injured workers, their families, and so forth. And so the Worker Safety and Insurance Board, formerly Worker Compensation Board of Canada, has kind of stepped up and enforced with companies that they need to take responsibility for this. And this means that we had to figure out how to stop some of the tragic deaths that were happening because I believe in 2015 there were actually 4 young workers aged 19 that died in the workplace and another 11 that died between the age of 20 and 24. So what they were noticing was experience was saving lives, but awareness was not occurring to help people who were new to the workforce and thereby not getting the level of insight that they want. Things have improved a little bit since then. Now, if you look at the information here, we actually had 4,764 workers die on the job in 2020. That basically equates to what you see as 3.4%, but that is North American wide. Fortunately, in Canada, it looks more like this in 2022, and that's why I said it got better. We still had 253,000 work-related injuries that caused lost time, but that's down from 1 million, right? Number of injury-related fatalities was down to 313, and the number of occupational disease fatalities were down to 611. So 313 would have been comparative to the 900 back in 2013, which is a step forward. But if you really paid attention to this, you notice that we classified things a little bit different. We talked about a number of lost time injuries, but then we talked about fatalities linked to injury and fatalities linked to disease. So we're going to take a moment now and we're going to take a look at those two concepts. So they become key terms that we want to discuss and how to differentiate between a workplace injury and a workplace illness. And it's actually fairly simple. If we look at it, an occupational injury is any cut, fracture, strain, sprain, amputation, yes, amputation, loss of a limb, a digit, and so forth, that results from a workplace accident or from exposure involving an accident in the workplace, right? So there's a little catch there, from a workplace accident or from an exposure involving a workplace accident. So if we had to amputate something because we were exposed to hydrogen chloride and it caused enough deterioration in our finger or whatnot that they had to amputate it, that would be still considered an occupational injury. And so it covers quite a number of things. What we stop to think about is there's other issues that pop up, and typically these issues are considered illnesses. And these are linked to abnormal conditions or disorders that result from an occupational injury that is environmentally driven and associated with employment. The biggest thing I can reference historically is those people exposed to asbestos in the workplace. So, or those people exposed to noise in the workplace. I think I've talked to you before about the fact that my father was a firefighter, and of course he had impact to his hearing as a result of riding on the trucks with the sirens running all the time, because today they give you ear protection, and back when he was a firefighter, they did not. The second thing he got was um, something called spatial dementia, which was linked to exposures to chemicals and whatnot that would have occurred in fires that he would have responded to at the time, because the equipment wasn't as good in the past as it is now. And so those would be occupational illnesses. Those are prolonged, deteriorating conditions that persist long past fractures and sprains and cuts. Hopefully that makes sense. But it gives you the foundation that we need to figure out how to move forward with making sure people are able to protect themselves. And we need to be able to differentiate between the occupational injuries that can be managed and addressed very quickly, and the occupational illnesses that require a lot more thought leadership, a lot more preparedness, and a lot more, unfortunately, time to notice and then mitigate. Now, as we alluded to during our conversations around the different types of laws that govern our employment, occupational health and safety is a law, right? So it's the Occupational Health and Safety Act. And if you remember what an act is, it is a collection of statements that are passed through the government to make law. And one of those statements was the fundamental duty of every employer to take reasonable precaution to ensure employee safety. And so the Occupational Health and Safety Act has put teeth to that, to say that employers are not only responsible, but they can be held criminally liable, and liable beyond just the co-worker's injury. In other words, their future, their family's future, and so forth, if reasonable precautions are not taken. And so you'll see back in the old days or whatnot, people would not be using fall arrest hardware and so forth as they worked on buildings. We talked about this again, and now you'll see that a lot of people are, because we got to take those reasonable precautions. We have to make them available. We have to train them to use them, and then we have to periodically audit and make sure that they're using that. And that's reasonable precaution. I love that reasonable pops up again, because there is room for debate on that, just as there is in reasonable notice and other reasonable terms we find in contract language. So reasonable gives us wiggle room to consider what reasonable is and what is not reasonable. But to be fair, the Occupational Health and Safety Act doesn't want to just knock on the doors of the employers. As a matter of fact, they believe that the employers can only take reasonable precautions, and that the employees need to actually step up and do the work of actually engaging in the safety practices and protocols, studying the material, looking at material safety data sheets and things like that. However, we also know that workers aren't necessarily going to do that or given the time to do that. And so they actually apply a lot of duties to the supervisors that require them to actually govern and manage and so forth. As a matter of fact, if you walk away with one understanding on the Occupational Health and Safety Act, the duties of the supervisors are the most deep and steep with responsibility and, unfortunately, accountability. So employers make sure it's reasonably there, and workers are expected to actually act reasonable in execution, but supervisors are responsible for ensuring workers follow the rules of the employers and ensuring the employers have readied the rules for the workers. Makes it a little bit more difficult. However, to help them out, we have created joint health and safety committees. And those joint health and safety committees are leadership and workers coming together in a group to perform a series of different responsibilities around occupational health and safety, including audits, recommendations, maintenance support, training, and so forth within the workplace. So even though supervisors do carry a lot of load and employers and workers have responsibilities, we now use this joint health and safety committee to be proactive. So we're going to take a moment now and look at the duties of employers. So as employers must provide a hazard-free workplace and comply with the applicable statutes and regulations. In class, I would have asked you to give me some examples. Right now, I want you to pause again. I want you to think about what that means. What does it translate into? What is a hazard-free workplace? Because it's almost impossible when you think about it to operate a business with machinery and chemicals and whatnot without hazards. So hazard-free has kind of a misnomer to it. So hit pause now, think about it. When you feel better about or come up with an option, press play again and we'll talk more. So welcome back. I think if you thought about it, you might find out hazard-free workplace is really about information, right? What are their safety and health requirements? We keep records about it so that we can look for areas of improvement. We compile and submit annual information so that we are able to track and look at our performance. We ensure supervisors are trained with potential hazards and that the Worker Safety Insurance Board is aware of accidents that cause injuries and diseases so that we can actually leverage them to our benefit and the benefit of our employees. So really it's about awareness and knowledge. So when we talk about hazard-free, it doesn't mean we don't have hazards. It means that there is no reason why employees shouldn't be aware of what the risks are and how to manage those risks so they are no longer a hazard. So that means it's similar to the supervisors, right? When we start saying that they have all this additional weight on them, it's not an unreasonable weight. It's just they're caught in the middle between the two responsibilities. And so this means that they actually have to advise the employees of the potential hazards, that they have to ensure that the employees are wearing safety equipment, devices, clothing, fall arrest devices, ear protection, etc. They actually have to provide written instructions for hazardous materials, which is kind of training on WHMIS, the material safety data sheets. They can let them know where that information is, and then take reasonable precautions to ensure the safety of the workers. So if they know something's a problem, ensure that that is highlighted or identified as such. And so we want to cordon off areas, mark off areas, note that you can't go into this area without wearing a hard hat and steel-toed boots, things like that. And so that all kind of falls on the duties of the supervisors. So the employer can identify it, the supervisors have to make sure that it's being acted upon. And now we find ourselves at the where the rubber hits the road, so they say, right? And so the duties of the workers. And I want you to pause again and think about what employees are required to do. All right, welcome back. I'm hoping you've thought about that. You maybe even reflected on your own job and realize you guys have a set of responsibilities, or we have a set of responsibilities as employees to comply with the regulations, to report hazardous conditions. So much like the supervisor, you've got to keep an eye out for it. But if we see it, we need to report that and defective equipment. And then we need to actually follow the health and safety rules and regulations, protective equipment, training, certifications. I remember when I was younger, people say, oh, go ahead, just grab that forklift and put that over there. And that should never have been done because safety would say that you need to be certified and registered to operate a forklift in order to drive it. And so would the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So these are the types of things that we consider, right? Because the most important thing to remember when you're a worker is that all workers have the right to refuse unsafe work without fear of consequences because the Occupational Health and Safety Act allows us that. If someone says, doesn't matter, go ahead and do that, you have the right to say, no, I will not. And if they decide to try and fire you, go to the Ontario Labour Board, and we go to a variety of different government routes that would ultimately protect you. So you have the right to refuse unsafe work conditions without fear of consequences, but you also have the mandate to follow the prescribed safety rules and whatnot when unsafe work conditions don't exist if you were to wear that equipment. So you can't not wear a hard hat and say, I'm not going in there because my head's going to get damaged. You have to be in compliance to be able to declare that. Now, the reality is a lot of us don't necessarily know what unsafe work conditions are, or we haven't had the chance to look at our work area as diligently as we hope we would. And so the Joint Health and Safety Committees are kind of tasked with that responsibility. And so you see here, it says both union and management representation. That's a unionized shop view, but of course, health and safety committees exist in non-union shops as well. And at that point, it's a employee and management representation. And the idea is to create an environment in which both have established a non-adversarial climate for creating health and safety in the workplace. The goal is not to be at each other's throats or fighting. The goal is to make sure nobody gets injured and make sure the liability of the company is protected as well. So I want you to pause now and think about things that they might do that fits into this Health and Safety Committee concept under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. Once you have, hit play again and we'll resume. Welcome back one more time. So a lot of times people go, I really don't know. And today we're going to have a chance, even here this week anyways, you'll have a chance to kind of act like a health and safety committee when you're going out there. But what we do is we check and make sure that certain safety mechanisms are in place. Do we have the required fire extinguishers? Are they checked, certified that they'll still work and in operational zones? Do we have the necessary protection equipment in place? Are hard hats available in lieu of steel toes or toe caps available? Do we have signage that restricts access to certain areas? That kind of stuff. Is there a leak coming through the ceiling where water's dripping on the floor and creates a slip hazard? Is there a railing loose on a stair? Is there a door that is supposed to be a fire door that doesn't close quite right, which means fire would spread through it? These are the types of things joint health and safety committees like to go through. So I'm sorry we can't do this activity because I think it helps out. Normally at this time we break out and we go look through the school for issues, but we won't have that pleasure this week. Instead, what I'm going to do is actually share with you a kind of a list of things that we take on, including the development of safe work environments. I talked about audits already, investigation of incidents, and of course, safety training, which I mentioned before. So essentially, these four factions work together to establish a culture of safety, because a culture of safety stems from promoting safety awareness, and it means that we are going to be in far better capable hands of controlling workplace accidents and injury, which is important to all people within the workplace. But promoting safety awareness really includes a couple key tasks, right? One, interviewing for safety, right? This is where we encourage supervisors to incorporate safety into their interviews with job candidates. We continually monitor safety behavior, make sure they have an awareness of what that looks like, and that we're hiring people who are actually proactively aware of safety and not completely dependent on what our capabilities, training, and knowledge is going to be. We have to bring about unsafe act recognition so we don't cause additional problems by bringing certain people into our organization. Respectfully as well, they have to, once they bring these people in, monitor that, right? They got to stress the safety training. They have to identify the programs. They have to show that they're going to monitor behaviors and take corrective action when things come up. And this has been responded to well by employees because they're showing a greater acceptance of awareness over time. And they feel a sense of ownership in the design and implementation of these programs when the supervisor talks about it before they're hired and then highlights it and reinforces it once they're in the workplace. However, it doesn't really end there. We've talked about training programs before, but proactive safety training programs and annual retaking of those programs becomes very much a responsibility of the supervisor as well. Right. So when we start thinking about what they're doing here, we start realizing that, hey, awareness is one thing, but reminding and keeping that awareness fresh is something completely different. And so a lot of you might be familiar with this if you have jobs. Some of you might not be, but will become familiar with this when you get jobs. They'll hire you, they'll set you on orientation training. That training includes safety training, women's training, fire training, and so forth. And then annually, they re-release those programs, and you actually have to go out and deliver, or not deliver. So you have to go out and take those programs multiple times just to ensure that you are aware of any updates, aware of any changes, and still consistently practicing this in your own daily actions. And so this is where I get the opportunity to challenge you to understand the culture of safety in Durham College. Because the students here, we've talked about this before, even though we have the employer and we have the workers, so DC leadership being the employer, faculty such as myself and admin staff being the employees, you as the consumer have to be on premises as well. And so a culture of safety includes protecting those people when they come through your facility. This applies to schools, it applies to movie theaters, it applies to restaurants, it applies to Canada's Wonderland. Anywhere where you go, where there is a potential that in a confined environment that is controlled by an organization, you get exposed to risk, they need to do their best to make sure that risk is mitigated. They can't train all of us, so they make tools, resources available to those people they can train. And so that's what you're going to do here. You're going to use a goose chase. And a goose chase is like an online scavenger hunt. And what I'm going to do is give you the week to do it, right? So it doesn't come live until 6 p.m. on Tuesday. That's because I don't want you doing it during the holiday because you're not supposed to be at school. And I just want to give people ample time to watch this video and get into their teams. Now, rather than break you into some kind of weird constructed team, I thought the best approach to this would be to group you in the teams for the group project. Great opportunity for you guys to get together. And so in your groups, you're going to download the app. Only one person has to download the app. And they can either sign up or they can choose a guest, and you can play either way. But again, only one person in your group needs to do this. Now, I've said only one person in the group needs to download the app and sign up as a guest, but all group members need to be there. And you'll find that one of the scavenger hunt things is show to me who your group members are. And so you're going to actually submit a photo of you as a group all together, prepared to do this. And that will give me the opportunity to confirm that you've been there. But then when you're in the groups, you're going to work by those groups in a different game based on availability. So group 1 to group 3, so group 1, 2, and 3 will enter the game code that's here. Group 4, 5, and 6, the next game code, 7, 8, 9, the next, and groups 10 and 11, the final game code. And that will allow you all to complete the game without any conflicts. As I said, they all come on just after 6 p.m. on Tuesday, and you guys can complete it any time before the weekend. So let's call it Friday at midnight. And what you do at that particular point in time, once you've entered the code, is put in your password, which is 13776, which is the CRN of this group, and you'll be in good shape to go. Now, as I said, one of the tasks is you're going to have to prove who on your team was there and present to do that. And by doing so, you will earn in-process marks that would have normally been done in the class. You're going to go around and answer the scavenger hunts. You need to complete them all to get the 2% for this week. And the person who does it the best, which means completes them all the fastest, and it times it. So complete them all the fastest with the most valid and accurate, creative, etc. approaches will get a double VIP mark, which means you could get as much as 4% on this, which might pick up poor performance somewhere else in the course. But as I said, your teams must successfully complete the hunt, and you only get it if you're a part of the team that's actually doing the hunt. So the teams are teams of 4. If a team of 3 goes out and does it, that one person in the team will not get it. So you need to not only identify that you're there, but make sure people know what your names are, or make sure I know what your names are, because I'm still not 100% fluid on everybody's name to identity. All right. If you have any questions about this exercise through the week, reach out to me through email or MS Teams, and we can connect and have a discussion around that. But when you do that, make sure you know what group you're in, because I'm going to ask you that question. What group are you in? So I make sure that the codes are available for you. All right. I will let you guys go with that, and I look forward to essentially what you're going to discover, which is normally the conversation we have just after you all get back. But we'll have to have that after reading week, because we won't have time with the midterm in week 7. So now with that activity behind us, it brings us to the next topic, which is enforcement of these safety rules. So as I'm sure you're aware, with the Occupational Health and Safety Act and any other law, the rules come with enforcement, because lack of enforcement or penalties, for lack of a better term, typically rules aren't followed, or at least people continue to do their own thing. And so we have to make sure we take that into consideration. And so penalties exist for a variety of different activities or decisions that we make collectively. Penalties exist for use of proper safety devices, providing proper safety devices, ensuring policies are in place that define procedures, ensuring those procedures are being followed, making sure that good housekeeping practices are in place, that we don't leave chemicals out, that chemicals are controlled, and that we actually report things that are happening so that it's not a culture of acceptance and forgetfulness. If an accident happens, we have to report it. And of course, the culture of wearing safety equipment and avoiding carelessness. Makes logical sense when you read it this way, but as with every enforcement, it always makes logical sense when you hear it and think about it. Doesn't always occur to us logically when we're in the midst of having a good time and potentially ignoring it. However, what we've been able to prove in the years the Occupational Health and Safety Act's been in place, and the years that we've improved our work illness and injury statistics, is that engaging employees in the program is very important. And so this is why things like the Joint Health and Safety Committee became such a thing. In other words, the opportunity for management and employees to come together and work collaboratively rather than against each other. But it also means that participating in training or safety training, so not just leaving it to management to provide, but train the trainer and get employees involved in training their peers, and job shadowing and things like that to ensure everybody is capable of implementing and designing safety programs that help their areas of the business. And then, of course, little things like incentives. Everyone loves to be incentivized, which means that if we do rewards and incentives for using your gear, for keeping records well, and for getting people, for limiting the amount of injuries that occur, people like to get those types of perks. Matter of fact, when I was at IKEA, that's one of the things we used to do, is every 30 days we went without a lost time injury. And a lost time injury meant if you cut your finger and put a bandage on it and went back to work, we really didn't worry too much about that. We take a note of it, but it didn't really tragically impact us. But if someone missed as much as an hour or a day from work, so had to go to the hospital because of an injury or had to stay home because of an injury, then we reset the counter. And so every time we got to 30 days, the areas and whatnot would be given a little bit of money to do a thank you for the workers of that area. And the second thing we did was the last point there is we got employees involved in accident investigations. So when we went into the initial investigation, we do it under control, and then we bring employees in to help us with that. And part of the reason was they might not be able to take a look at what went wrong, but they might be able to suggest what might have stopped or what went wrong from happening in the future. And that involvement means they own that process a little bit more and help to bring it to life. So this is the first opportunity that I have in class to have a discussion. So I know a lot of you are going to roll your eyes and not want to do this, but given that week 7 is our midterm, and the midterm includes questions where you apply concepts and think about things we've learned in the course and how you use that in a situation, taking the time to go into DC Connect and looking up the sick driver versus CN Rail, and understanding the case and developing some thoughts based in course material and occupational health and safety information would be beneficial. So I'm hoping that you'll pause now, you'll go do that, and when you're done, you'll hit play again. So an interesting question that comes up there is how to get people engaged in safety in the workplace, especially if there's conflicts and things like that that come into it. And I want you to think about that a little bit more as we start to get into the next steps behind this, because the word workplace is an interesting variable. So the question becomes, how does the Occupational Health and Safety Act define a workplace? Right? And so we ask those questions. Do you consider an offsite meeting to be a workplace? What about a holiday party? And this is the second case that you can take a look at. So please hit pause, take a look at the holiday parties and workplace accidents that's in DC Connect, and review that for consideration in this component. Once you're finished doing that, hit play again, and we'll go and talk about that. All right. All right, welcome back. And so it's an interesting consideration about what a workplace is. And if you did read the case, you're going to recognize that anywhere a work function is going on that you've been invited to on behalf of work initiatives is actually considered a workplace. So this includes vehicles that are used for work, even if it's your personal vehicle during work hours. This includes a customer's location if you're there for a work-related meeting, be it sales or some other meeting. This includes even you in transit to a remote location if you're going for work. And oddly enough, workplace becomes the airport and the plane and so forth. And that doesn't mean that they have to train you on safety in those environments. But what it does mean is if you're injured in one of those environments and you're there for work, it becomes a work-related injury. And that means that there's a different protocol through the Worker Safety and Insurance Board to deal with that rather than just through your own insurance and other OHIP requirements. So keep that kind of stuff in mind as we go. And this brings us to our final topic we're going to talk about today, which is something a lot of people don't think about as being part of the Occupational Health and Safety Act requirements or about being workplace safety related. But workplace violence is a growing trend, and this is something that we need to be aware of, and employers need to take just as many precautions against as they do other types of injuries and illnesses. And so for clarity, workplace violence means threatening behavior like throwing objects, verbal or written threats, harassment, or any behavior that demeans, embarrasses, or humiliates, verbal abuse, mental abuse, threats of termination, things like that are all, in fact, acts of workplace violence. And the interesting thing is that even with the Occupational Health and Safety Act in place, it missed workplace violence originally, right? And you can see now it actually, government has passed Bill 168 in 2010 that added workplace violence, harassment, and domestic violence in the workplace. So unrelated to work, domestic problems where a partner follows the other partner to work and then does violence is now covered by that. So the changes to the Occupational Health and Safety Act calls employers to address these type of violent acts, including the domestic violence, when it spills over to the workplace. So essentially, it says that we can't hide domestic violence under the covers of the guise that's a personal issue and not a work issue once that makes it to the workplace itself. And this really came back from the families of Lori DuPont and Teresa Vince. If you look them up, DuPont, who was 36, was killed by her ex-boyfriend, gentleman named Dr. Mark Daniel, in 2005 at a hospital in Windsor, where they both worked. So wasn't in the hospital. They both worked at the hospital. And so apparently the hospital was aware that harassment had been happening and that the situation was getting worse, but wasn't empowered to discipline at that time under Occupational Health and Safety Acts, and therefore chose to turn a blind eye to it. Similarly, Teresa Vince was actually shot in the face and killed in Chatham, Ontario in 1996 by a boss who had sexually harassed her for more than a year. She'd actually filed harassment complaints around. And so these workplace violence was just hidden, covered, ignored. And so this 56-year-old woman who was an HR administrator, wife, mother, grandmother, was due to retire that year and was shot by the store manager at the place that she worked, who then turned the gun on himself and killed himself as well. And these two cases jointly really helped spin together this Bill 168 that said, hey, anytime we get violence or whatnot in the workplace, it is something worth owning, being responsible for, and something that is specifically a responsibility of the employer, the worker, and the supervisor, as laid out in the Occupational Health and Safety Act. Tremendous change, tremendous benefit for those parties that are impacted by this. Finally, just to kind of close this one up, I want to kind of catch this workplace harassment concept in a definition here, that it essentially means that anytime you engage in conduct against a worker in the workplace that is known or not reasonably, there's that term reasonable again, reasonably known to be unwelcome. So remember I told you before, if you basically say, hey, that's a nice outfit you're wearing, you haven't harassed that person, but the person says, I don't like it when you make those comments to me, and then you make them again, now you ought reasonably to know that it's unwelcome, at which point you are harassing them. And so that is Bill 168 as well, the clarification behind you ought reasonably to know. Obviously, some things don't need to be fully instructed, but I'm just saying a situation like that might need a bit of an instruction to set that reasonable in motion. I like sharing this statistic just for an FYI. So if you look at this, it basically says last year, in 2022, a study from Western University, so in London, Ontario, essentially worked with the University of Toronto, downtown Toronto, and the Canadian Labour Congress, which is essentially the body of representatives for union control, union labor board relationships in Canada. Did this study and found out that 71.4% of workers have experienced one form of harassment and abuse in their workplace in a single year period from 2020 to 2021. And that's stunning. Everyone knows it kind of happens, but we don't necessarily think the 71.4% of us have been through an experience of this nature. And it's quite alarming, but I wanted to make you aware of it. Just to kind of frame that statistic, it's interesting to realize, and now this is a 2016 survey, but it kind of drives the numbers that we've been looking at. And you can see here that harassment comes in various types of forms. And so there's a total harassment, which is the dark blue. There is a men that have been harassed, which is the white bar, and women have been harassed. And I apologize that it's only the two gender notifications in this particular survey, rather than having the open gender identity understanding that we enjoy today. But this is what I have from an information standpoint. But it goes to show you that it's not a unique biological restrictive type issue, that we get harassed regardless of our gender identity and sexual preferences. But sometimes it's about those. And we get harassed by clients and customers more often than other forms of contact in business. And I think that's interesting, is that we tend to get harassed more by the people we serve and who are being serviced by us rather than the people we work with. And then it gets into kind of upper management and peers, and it's almost equal. And then we look at employees, so other employees being people that we work with but don't necessarily have direct relationships with or so forth. And then finally, it can happen at board member levels. You'll see there's a distinct drop off in male harassment, and female is definitely higher. And then other is just meant to capture anything that we hadn't caught before. But you can see it's kind of a pare down. And as it pares down, there's differences kind of in the impact. So biological female, harassed more by clients and customers, biological male by supervisors and peers, just of interest. So keep that in mind when we start thinking about the workplace violence, and that 71.4%, is that even a hazing or making fun of somebody for the way they dress, present, talk, so forth, is a form of harassment, which is a form of workplace violence, which is not acceptable in any format. And so based on that, it's important to recognize the characteristics that put people at risk in workplace violence. And so judging by that with customers, we see, hey, interacting with the public being the biggest thing out there, making decisions that influence others, terminating employees, denying a request. So which means even as a leader, manager, or supervisor, you can be harassed by the people that are subordinate to you, simply because you're doing things they don't like, but it's the right thing to do for the company or a mandate from the company. You also see working nights or working alone, people get harassed more. And we've seen that too. People's inhibitions drop in the evenings, or the inhibitions drop when they're not in a crowd. And I think the last one's somewhat self-explanatory. When you're handling cash, it's amazing how many people will harass you for it and put you in a place of fear. So normally this is a discussion we go and we take up in class and whatnot. But I'm going to do it with the standard, ask the question, what can an employer do to minimize workplace violence? And then I want you to think about it. So hit pause now, put some genuine thought into it, and then I'll reveal what I'm going to share, and you can compare it to your own thoughts. All right. Welcome back. Well, naturally, there are preventative measures that we think about in the organization. The first one that kind of pops to mind typically is workplace design. And that says essentially, have we put physical barriers in place? Do we have access? Do we have cameras, electronic surveillance with recording? And think about COVID, right? When COVID first hit, people were, how do I control? How do I protect myself? We started putting up visible barriers that separated us from the public, and the public from the people working and so forth. We had restricted access hours. We had different hours for different people. Seniors were allowed to come beforehand and so forth, so they could get out before the masses showed up because they were more at risk. And this is what we're talking about in workplace design. It gives us a chance to do that controlled access, flow one direction, which we did again in COVID. And so we see it kind of transpire. We don't necessarily think about this workplace design as a preventative measure, which it absolutely is. The other thing we get into is administrative practices. And this means, hey, you know what? Minimizing variable responses. In other words, support one another so that everyone says the same thing and that we don't get people reacting one way versus another way. And of course, escalation routines and contact numbers. So if people are working alone or in isolation or at night, they know how to get hold of certain people and get the help that they need in those situations. And then finally, we take a look at work practices, and work practices do include, like, don't let people travel alone, have designated contacts for checking in, checking out. When I worked at IKEA again, I would often close, and closing would happen at a certain point in the night when I was the only person left in the building. And the check-in was, as I was leaving, I had to alert the overnight security that I was there, and if they didn't hear from me by a certain time, they'd come and check to make sure that I was okay. So I had to let them know by 11:30 that I turned the alarm on and turned over responsibility for the site to them. And if they hadn't heard from me by 11:30, they'd roll a car out to come and make sure I was all right. Normally I did, but a couple of times they dropped in on me because I got lost in work and didn't let them know. And then, of course, develop credentials so that we have client management training and we have those annual type programs, etc., that remind us what work practices save us and protect us. And that brings us to the end of this week. So we talked about federal and provincial occupational health and safety legislation. We intertwined them together. The occupational health and safety that we talked about mostly was from the provincial level, as it incorporates a lot of the federal components in there. But we talked about federal stats and so forth, and typically our teeth come from the federal jurisdiction. We talked about how managers and employees can create a safe work environment and the way to control and eliminate on-the-job hazards. We also talked about how to better protect ourselves in the workplace, both from occupational injury, occupational illness, and workplace violence. So think about that kind of stuff. All right. So this brings us to the end of this week's lesson. Just a reminder to do your goose chase and submit your IP group work through that goose chase. So there's no Dropbox or anything like that. You just complete the goose chase, show me the people who were present, and you'll get credit for it. And then in week 8, we'll take a look at the results, and it will be revealed who gets the double reward for the efforts put in this week. All right. Next reminder too is not to forget that there is still a Connect assignment due for this particular, DC Connect quiz due for this particular week before the test, kind of your last chance to quiz yourself before the test comes up. And then remind you that the midterm evaluation is in class week 7. You need to show up in class. You need to sign in or book it with the test center, but you need to actually be on site and in person. If you're not, you will find that you get 0. All right. Now, speaking of the test, let's just take a moment to talk about it. As I have mentioned, the week 7 midterm evaluation is an in-class midterm evaluation. And that essentially means that the test will be loaded onto DC Connect. So there are no paper copies. You'll access that through the quizzes capability, and you'll need to be on site. As I said, you'll need to sign in, but there's also a password encryption So you'll need to ensure you get the password to be able to do this. It does cover chapters 1, 2, 13, and 12, which are the chapters we've covered up until now in the course. Speaking of that, it will be open book. So what you have as far as notes, DC Connect, and your textbook is welcome, but it is timed. It is 90 minutes, and so I don't want you to think that you don't have to prepare properly because you'll run out of time. It is a 20 multiple choice question quiz. Each multiple choice question is worth 1 mark, and it also has 10 short answer questions worth 4 marks each. So that means a total of 60 marks. And as I said, if you don't study, you will find that trying to look everything up through your course notes and your textbook will cause you to run out of time. Once the test starts, there's no turning back. You'll have to complete it. The 90-minute timer just keeps counting down. All right. Anyways, hopefully you all had a great Thanksgiving long weekend. Hopefully, for those that celebrated Thanksgiving, you had a good time with your family and friends. For those that didn't, you had a nice relaxing weekend. And I look forward to seeing you all in week 7's class. If you have any questions before that, please reach out to me via email or MS Teams, and I'm certain I can help you with any questions you have. All right. Take care.